There's not a lot of guys that can do that. I mean, we'd be hoisting the winch over the edge, pulling guys up.
Well, I was feeling like a sissy this morning. I'm like, why am I so sore?
We've got a house on our... This isn't your grandpa's woolly bugger. I happen to know somebody at Drop Jaw Flies that got one of these stuck in their finger, and they work really well. They're hard to get out.
Hey guys, welcome to the Drop Jaw Flies podcast. On this episode, we talk about fly fishing knots. I asked Jason Arvey for his 5 favorite fishing knots, and the 5 knots that every beginner fly fisherman needs to know. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to leave us a review on our YouTube channel. I am Chad Nelson, along with my co-host, Jason Arvey. Here is today's podcast. Oh, brother, don't get me started, but I think getting into knots, man, it can get really political.
Well, I think the knots that we use, it's definitely for a reason, and I'd go toe-to-toe verbally with anybody on our choice of knots.
Yeah. Well, it's just a matter of opinion, right? I mean, some people have been taught certain knots. They've had good success with them. And so, hey, go with it, man.
Yeah, definitely. All the knots that we use are, number one, they've got to be quick to tie. Because if you're on the water, you got to maximize that time and get fishing. And I don't want to spend 20 minutes messing with a knot.
Well, that's certainly got to be part of it. And as we get into these knots, that's one aspect of each knot I do want to discuss is it easy or difficult to tie?
You bet. I think every knot should probably have like a difficulty rating, like 1 to 10, how difficult is it?
Well, I tell you what, I spent an hour last night just researching breaking strength. And man, you could talk for an hour about that. And there's all kinds of charts out there that show this, that, but some of them do rate difficulty on a scale of 1 to 10. Is it easy or is it difficult?
Certain knots are easier to tie with monofilament too. And you got your fluorocarbon that we're tying knots with mono. We don't use braid very often in those different synthetic materials but each knot can be tied difficult with some difficulty or less difficulty depending on the material that you use.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I was researching breaking strength last night and all these charts and everybody that's done their own tests and opinions, man, the other factor is just what you brought up. What line, braided, mono, what are you using and what poundage? And depending on that, there's certain breaking strength ratings for those different types of line.
You bet.
Man, that's a complicated subject.
It is. And I think I've moved away, or probably we both have, of complicated. We're trying to get less complicated, especially on the water. Because when you're at home sitting around by the fire and you want to tie some knots, then you can experiment and do that. But on the water, it's got to be simple and quick.
Yeah.
And strong.
Especially when it's 20 degrees outside. Your hands are turning into popsicles. You don't want a complicated knot that's going to take you 5 minutes to tie. And you might not even be able to tie it with cold hands like that. So,
yeah, that's exactly right.
So let's not complicate it. Let's keep it easy, but still make sure it's a good, secure knot, because I tell you what, I lost a fish 10 years ago, a nice fish, because my knot came untied. This is when I was streamer fishing, fishing with spinners, I meant. And man, that fish took off with my spinner, my Panther Martin, in its mouth.
So when you reeled your line back, it was just kind of frayed at the end, so you knew the knot had come apart, or
Yeah, exactly. You could see, how it was all frayed. You know, the line was coiled up tightly still.
ah.
It was just a clinch knot that I was using, and I obviously didn't tie it very well because it came undone.
Well,
So,
that's the thing about that clinch knot. When you're drawing that knot closed, and
yeah.
there's the loop at the very end. If people take the tag end and stick it back up through that, they call that the transverse loop.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes the improved clinch knot, and it's
Right.
so hard to slip then. But I've had the same thing, Chad, where I looked at my improved clinch knot. Hey, this is supposed to be a good knot. No fly at the end of it. It's just a little frayed. And it either wasn't seated properly, or there wasn't enough coils, or it just slipped. That knot will slip if in certain situations. So we
Yes,
learn we learn the hard way on that one.
exactly.
Was yours a big fish that you lost it in, or?
It was a nice fish. I mean, especially for me at the time, and this was, again, on the Snake River. Um, but man, I sure would have loved to land it. I got it within 5 feet of the shoreline, and then bam, it's just gone. So live and learn.
Good story, good lesson.
So it's been well noted on our podcast that I just got into fly fishing a year ago. And so one thing that was amazing to me, Jason, is how many knots there are for fly fishermen. I mean, again, just the research I was doing last night, a lot of people have put together these charts with all the different knots, breaking strength, a ton of different information on the knots. And I'm amazed at how many knots are out there for fly fishermen. So I'm just learning these knots, but what I asked you to cover on this podcast, I asked you to come with your top 5 favorite knots. And again, these are just your knots that you have experience with or familiarity with, and probably have had success. So let's jump into that, Jason. Let's cover the top 5 knots you think every beginning fly fisherman needs to know.
Well, those are super important topic, because I know there's guys that have bought fly rod combos and have gone out onto the water and hey, let's go fishing, yeah, and they open up the box. I've been there,
Yeah.
and they have to tie everything together, connect their leader to their line, and tip it and fly, and it's just sometimes it's not there. They don't have the knowledge, and I remember that happening to a guy. He was pretty discouraged. So let's go through that. Some of like, if you were going to go fly fishing for the first time, what knots that you would need to know, kind of the essential ones. And those essential ones are my favorite too. Kind of the ones that I've used over the last at least the last 10 years. So,
well, and let me just comment on that, because I would concur with what you just said. Starting out fly fishing with you, man, fly fishing is fun, and I'm hooked now. Love it. Don't ever see going back to a spinner rod, but I'm still learning the knots, and it was a little frustrating for me at the beginning, because you would have to tie my knots for me, depending on if we're fishing, nymphing, dry fly, streamers, whatever. I'm like, Jason, that looks like a cool setup you got going there, but I don't know how to tie it. So I would say, man, if you're starting out, awesome. Hope you enjoy it, but spend a little time and learn the knots so you can go out and put the setup together that you want.
yeah, knowing the knots, how to tie them is like having the key to the Ferrari. Because if you can have a Ferrari, but if you don't have the key, it's like no good. So, um, let's go, Chad. How about we start with the line to the top of the leader, or the butt section? Would that be good? We start right there.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so most modern lines now are going to have, and this is the fly line, they're going to have that loop that's built in. It's called a welded loop.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tie a clinch knot to that loop if you want to. you don't have to do a nail knot, which has been the traditional way to connect a leader to the line. Traditionally, the line just came right out of the box, and I don't know if you can see this or not, but this is just a black cord, but it was just straight. And then you had to do a nail knot at the end of it. Well, now most all modern fly lines, they have a loop just like that at the end, and you can do a clinch knot or whatever joining knot you want to that loop. But what we do is a perfection loop on our butt section of our leader. You can pass that loop, the perfection loop knot, right up through the line, or slide it over the top, put the end of your butt section through there, and we'll have go through these knots in detail with some colored line, but today we're just talking about them. But I like the perfection knot for the butt section to attach, or perfection loop to attach the butt section of the leader, the thick part of the leader, to the fly line. So knot number one is the perfection loop.
Great. So with the perfection loop, Jason, you just said this is for connecting leaders. Does it matter what size line you want to connect to the leader?
You probably want it technically maybe 3/1000ths less in diameter than your fly line. And there's different situations, but for us, we're typically throwing really large flies. And I know you're doing an 8-weight line. I'm doing a 9-weight line on 8-weight rods. And it's pretty stout, the fly line is, right at the end even. And so our butt section of our leader needs to be really thick, because as the fly line unrolls, there's so much mass at the end of the line, kicks over really hard. If your butt section is not thick, it just it would throw that leader right around, wouldn't do much for you. Everything would land in a big pile. So our butt section of our leader is 50 pound, and it's fairly thick diameter. It's not much less in diameter than the line. So when the line unrolls, the leader will carry that energy and continue to roll out. But if we had 4-pound test on for our butt section, which nobody would do, your fly line would just go straight down in a heap, because the leader, that thin leader, could not carry the mass or energy. And I know that's really technical. We could talk about this forever.
But for a guy fishing a 4-weight rod, 6-weight, whatever, perfection loop is still a great knot for them.
Oh my goodness. It's just learn it. No, man, I just encourage everybody to learn it, because not only do we use it for that connection, but even some of the bigger connections in the leader, we can join with a perfection loop. So usually you have different sections of graduating difference in diameter. As you go down the tip of the leader, sections usually get smaller. And even joining those sections together, you can do with a perfection knot, perfection loop.
Yeah.
Just join them together really quickly.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being easy, 10 being difficult, how would you rate this knot for learning and tying?
I would, to start off, it is a little tricky. Even the diagrams that are out there, the best diagrams, the best videos, you can pick it up. I think, you could get the basic techniques of how to manipulate the line so that the loops don't go all crazy on you. Mm-hmm. But it is dexterity wise with your fingers, it can be kind of tricky. And so I would probably put it, just starting out, learning it, it might be a 6 or 7.
Okay.
But it's one that you can quickly learn, and it becomes a lot easier.
But well worth the time to learn.
It's one of those knots. It's just a have to learn, must learn, I think.
So I as I mentioned earlier, I saw a lot of different information out there regarding breaking strength. But in general, this one was rated pretty high, 90 to 95% breaking strength.
Mm-hmm. Good knot. Might not be the strongest, but when you're working in those heavier diameter mono and fluorocarbon, it'll hold up fine.
Explain that for people newer to fly fishing. What does breaking strength mean? What are they referring to?
Well, if you were to just peel off, say, some tippet off of a spool or some mono or whatever right off the spool, and you were to not, it wouldn't be knotted at all, but if you were to clamp both sections and then pull it apart, it would be, how much pounds of force does it take to break that section? So, a 3x diameter, or say the tippet section, should have about an 8-pound breaking strength. It would take 8 pounds of force to break that. And when you say that, a knot usually is weaker than just a standing or a straight piece. And so if it's 8.3 pounds of force to break a standing line piece of material, if you can get a knot that will hold up to 8.3 pounds, it's 100, and to break there, it's a 100% of that line's breaking strength. So we're trying to find a knot that's as 100% of that particular material's breaking strength. Does that make sense? Or
yeah. But in general, the higher the number, you want something at least over 80%, I think, in general. And that's a pretty secure knot.
Right, because most of the knots that we use aren't 100%.
Sure.
There are knots that are, but, we're our tippet that we're using is 20 pound. And we're fishing for trout, so we don't need 100% breaking strength.
Very good. Hey, the next knot you sent me in the list of your top 5 is the blood knot. Let's talk about that for a minute. What is the blood knot?
The blood knot. So that's been around for a long time.
I would learn it just because it's a pretty cool sounding knot.
And when you tie it correctly, it is awesome. Well, there's a lot of benefits to this. So this is a joining tippet section type of a knot. So if you have a thick butt section and you want to graduate down to a little bit thinner section, blood knot is awesome. You can use blood knots all the way through your leader to join the different sections. Some leaders have 15 different sections as they graduate and go smaller down to the tippet. And you can do blood knots for all those. Let's talk about a little bit what about that knot. Been around for a long time. To tighten heavier sections of mono or whatever, as you're drawing that knot down, you have to pull so hard on some of the bigger sections that it could draw blood. Now, that's one of the legends of why this is called a blood knot. So who knows, really? But that's one of the legends about it.
Gotcha.
So, and one of the hard and fast rules of this knot is if you have say, let's just go in pounds. How about 50 pound butt section, and you're going to join a 30 pound butt section below it. You're tying this knot. The 50 pound section is going to be thicker. And so what you want to do is you want to have less wraps of the heavier and maybe 1 or 2 more wraps of the smaller diameter. And what you're trying to achieve is when the two halves come together, that this smaller part of the knot and this bigger part have equal mass, so that when they're pulled on, there's a couple more wraps of the smaller to pull against the heavier part. So when you're tying that knot, there's no, guidelines as this tippet material or this section, you must have 5 wraps. This one, you must have 7. There's just nothing like that. So what you're looking for is that both halves are equal in mass. And if you get close to that, it'll be a super strong knot.
Gotcha. One of the great things about this knot is it's pretty low profile in that it should be able to slide through the guides relatively easy, correct?
Another good benefit for that. And you can also take a little bit of super glue on the ends and dab it on there and then roll that gently. I mean, if you're hardcore, you don't want this to go all the way down, but you just want to keep the glue right at the end, and it will form kind of a cone or a point right off the edge of that knot, and it will even go through the guides even slicker that way.
And again, this one rated out really high in terms of breaking strength, correct?
Yeah, it's it's a must know for fly fishing. Must know knot. The other cool thing about it is if you use knotless tapered leaders, the kind you buy out of the package, if your water you're fishing has a lot of vegetation or debris in it or material, that the knotless leader won't pick any of that up, and that's a cool feature of that. And the blood knot is probably a step right below that as far as picking up crap off the surface of the water or below. Because knots will pick up crap as they get pulled through the water, and
Yes.
those knots are probably right below the knotless leaders as far as picking crap up.
So, how would you rate this one on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of easy or difficult?
You know, I've seen a lot of bad blood knots because it can be a tricky one to tie, and especially to seat. So it's one you've got to practice with for a while, and it's going to be in that 7, probably 7, 8.
Yeah.
But again, when you learn to tie, when you learn to do anything, it gets easier. But right off the get go, it could be, depending on how dexterous your fingers are and how closely you pay attention to the detail, it's going to be 5 to 7 difficulty.
This is one knot. Just looking at it, you can tell if it's tied correctly or not, if it was done well.
You're right, Chad. I mean, you can you take a quick glance, you know if it's done right.
Okay, number 3, Jason, you sent me is the surgeon's knot. What is this knot used for?
This is another joining tippet section knot, and it is way easier than the blood knot, but I wouldn't use it on the heavier sections. Anything above 3x, I'm going to be joining with a blood knot. But anything below that, you can get away with a double or a triple surgeon knot. And it's so easy. You just run the two pieces of material about 6 to 8 inches on top of each other, and then you tie an overhand knot. Everybody knows how to tie the overhand knot. And you do that 2 times if you want, or 3 times. Anything past that, and scientifically, they say it doesn't matter. Like one more wrap's not stronger than a third or even 2. So the surgeon knot is so easy to tie. And like I said, for the smaller sections of leader or for your tippet to your leader, I do a surgeon knot and be fine with it.
Yeah, it's great for lines of varying sizes, correct?
Yes. You wouldn't want to go too much more like crazy in difference, but yeah, easy to do, easy to tie.
So this is easy on a scale of 1 to 10. How does the breaking strength then rate on it?
It is really strong for the simplicity, and that would be a huge benefit. I don't know the exact breaking strength because each material is going to be a little different. A lot of people tie a fluorocarbon tippet to a monofilament leader, and that plays in a little differently. But it's got a pretty high breaking strength to it.
Yeah, everything I read online agrees with that. 90 to 95%, some had it that high. So that's pretty good.
Yeah. Love that knot. And I use it a lot. And there's a variation of it called the surgeon's loop, which I tie flies on with too. That we were talking about our hands being cold. You can tie a fly on pretty easy with the surgeon's loop and have all the benefits of the swinging fly to make it look more alive, and tie it quickly and easily. And so surgeon loop is a winner. And must learn. Must learn.
I agree. Even I can do that one. Okay, number 4 on your list is the improved clinch knot. We kind of talked about this earlier. Guys, spinner fishermen, fly fishermen, everyone can use this knot.
Yeah.
What's great about it, Jason?
The strength, it is a strong connection, and you don't have to use a whole lot of wraps to use this knot. Like a lot of people will say you got to do 7 wraps or 9 wraps. Sometimes you can get away with 3. And here's something: if the fish are really picky, slow, clear water, bright day, you can make an improved clinch knot. And say you're using a really teeny fly, the knot doesn't create a huge profile in and of itself. You can make it so small, and you can even color it black to match the thread on your fly to look like it doesn't even have a knot on it. So, love the clinch knot. I don't ever use the clinch knot unless the fish are tiny, and I just don't want to do that extra step. Like, I don't care if I lose the fish or whatever. But normally when I use it, I'll run the tag end back up through that transverse loop that comes down the line as you're snugging up in just a regular clinch knot,
Yep.
and make it improved so it can't pull through.
So varying line sizes, doesn't matter. Anybody can use this knot, correct?
Right. It's a staple, maybe one of the most recognized in fly fishing. The clinch and the improved clinch, great knots. They do take up a fair amount of tippet if you aren't familiar with using it. So if you're trying to conserve tippet, you can burn up a lot. When you get really good at it, then you don't use that much tippet, and it's just a good knot that way, all the way around, from conserving material, breaking strength, ease to tie, good knot.
Well, I guess I've got some work to do because I still use a lot of tippet when I tie this knot.
Yeah, you got to be pretty tie it a lot before you start saving your tippet.
And the same is true for me with our number 5 knot, which is the non-slip loop knot. Now, this is one that you and I use daily. Mm-hmm. So talk about this knot, because you actually taught it to me.
My favorite knot, it really is. And here's a point. You can learn to tie it pretty quickly if you know the overhand knot and you know a clinch knot. That's basically what this is. It's learning how to draw it down correctly. That's the trick about it. Yeah, you're going to burn up some tippet, but it's so worth it. So worth it. So
such a strong knot. It really is worth burning up some tippet for.
Yeah. Here's a fly we were using, 7-inch bad boy, 7-inch juvenile trout fly, we call it. Articulated, 3 hooks, weighted, has a rattle. Oh yeah.
Yes.
Dun, 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 dun. So great fly. But anyway, I was trying to do a Mondo huge cast and let the fly line on my back cast go a little bit too long. And all the energy of this fly, it just went straight down into the rocks. As I came forward, I felt my rod catch and I knew I'd hit something. Went forward, though, with a lot of force, and my line just went out, and I could tell there was no fly on it. And I was like, I lost my fly.
I watched it happen. Yeah.
I put my rod down, and I went searching for this, because this isn't Grandpa's woolly bugger. You know what I mean? This is takes a long time to tie, and it's a lot of material.
Don't want to lose it.
Yeah. And so I went searching for it, and I found it, and it was in between. It was in between 2 rocks. Like if these were rocks.
Yeah, just wedged in between them.
Yeah. So the line had gone down in between, and it was stuck in some rocks, just like this. I picked up the fly, and the knot was totally intact, and the line was broke out here.
Yeah,
a little way. So
The knot held. It
Oh yeah,
snapped your 20-pound line.
yeah. So that loop, that knot, and plus the advantage of it being a loop, it lets this fly swing around. And um, what I think also is important, that the breaking strength's incredible. Like seriously, guys, learn to tie that knot for sure. But because it's on a loop, when I stop pulling on my fly line, this fly is able to tip up like this and go down instead of sink like this. And as it goes down, I've seen the cutthroat that we're after follow it at that angle and hit the tail, and it's there. It's just perfect to hook them like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started learning this knot this last summer with you, my go-to knot was the clinch knot. And learning to cast, I had snagged a lot of weeds, a lot of branches. My clinch knot came untied several times, with the amount of force that I was casting this 8-weight, rod with. When I started tying and learning this non-slip knot, I haven't had one come undone. So just my experience, but man, it's a killer knot. Really works.
Yeah, when you get one hooked up, snagged up on a rock or something, you got to pull really hard somewhere. It's going to put a lot of stress on your line to come free at some point.
Well, and that's the other nice thing about the knot. You don't always have to walk 30, 40 feet behind you to unsnag it. Sometimes you can just pull it, and you rip the weeds out. But if you're feeling lazy, it works, right?
Yeah, I've pulled over some pretty good sized rocks on the bottom that it's gotten hooked on it, and I've pulled on it and pulled the rock over and to get the fly undone. So, yeah, this is a knot that is something that I'd hate to be without the knowledge on how to use it, how to tie it.
Yeah, for sure. Let's switch gears real quick. Well, talking knot tying, I want to go to a mailbox question, a question that's come in for us. And they ask, are there any tools you'd recommend for beginners learning to tie knots? I'm assuming they mean physical tools. So for knot tying, any tools out there for guys learning to tie these knots that they should have?
There are some knot tying tools. The Tie Fast tool is a great one for tying the nail knot, so your butt section of leader to your fly line. I have that tool and it's on my lanyard. I don't ever use it to do that with, but I do use it to tighten knots up with. And so
gotcha.
I use it to tighten my perfection loops. There are other tools that help you tie the clinch knot really fast. For people that you are not used to that or not very dexterous with their fingers, they can be a real benefit that way. But I would just practice. My 2 cents, Chad, would be to just learn to tie the knot. Sit down at the table, at the fireplace, at work, wherever, and tie the knots until you can do them quickly.
Yeah. You can even use, you don't have to use fishing line to start out with. You can use a braided cord or, even a rope, something a little bigger just while you're learning.
You bet. Super good tool. Good suggestion. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I know I asked you for your top 5, but let's talk about the figure 8 dry fly knot real quick. I know that's a great handy knot that people should learn too.
You bet. Now that one, I dry fly, when there's a good hatch or I just don't do it very often, but I grew up loving it and I still do. And so the knot that I use for that is going to be the figure 8 turtle knot or figure 8 knot. And it saves the most tippet because it's a pain, to have to switch out your tippet section. And I usually like to have a long tippet section. So when I'm switching out flies, it doesn't take up a whole lot of that tippet. In a fishing situation, especially when you're going down the river on a boat and you're passing up a whole bunch of good water and you need to retie, but you want to keep your tippet section long, that's the knot. Love it. and it's easy. I swear that knot is once you get it down, I guess it's like anything. Can tie it really quickly, and even in the cold.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter if your fly is big or small, love that knot. It just works.
So
It's
those,
really strong too.
yeah, strong, easy to tie, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those 6 are our top 5.
They are, yes, tried, true, great knots. If you know those knots, you'll be pretty set up.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of great videos on YouTube. I mean, tons and tons of videos that show you, teach you how to tie these knots. So, and we're going to put together some videos too. We'll post them to our website in the near future. So you can go to our website and watch Jason tie these knots. He's a pro.
Well, thank you. You are too, man. Once you get those knots down, you're a pro.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm a pro at. And speaking of knots, I'm still learning to cast these big flies, but sometimes, in my casting, I'll bring my fly, I'll create a loop, and my fly will come through that loop, and I will put a knot in my line. Talk about that, Jason, because I was surprised to learn that actually weakens the line. Right?
Yeah, it does. So that's so classic, and no matter how good you get at casting, it's a wind knot or a leader knot or a casting knot, whatever. But it's cause we can go over that in a different podcast because that's it's a casting deal why that happens. I don't want to say casting flaw because nobody wants to know they have a flaw, and everybody does it, so it happens no matter what. But as the fly's unrolling, sometimes the two halves of line can come together, and the fly will go up through the loop and
Mm-hmm.
put a knot in your line, in your leader. And if you get a big fish or a snag, and you pull on that,
Mm-hmm.
it cuts into itself, and it can weaken, and there goes your line. It can shear, and it'll break at that overhand knot that was put in your leader.
Well, yeah, I do it often. So I'm a pro. I'm a pro at tying that knot, and I usually will take it out of my line when I see it. But a few weeks ago, I knew I had a knot in my line, and I snagged something really hard, and it snapped my line right where that knot was. So, I did learn in that instance that having a knot in your line does, in fact, weaken it there.
Yeah. Yeah, and was that on a fish that broke or what?
No, fortunately, it wasn't. It was on a rock.
Because I've had a couple break on a fish like that.
Ouch.
Thank goodness, though, brother, it was just a rock and not a fish.
Yeah, fortunately, it was just on my back cast, but yeah, it snapped it.
So, guys that have casted for a long time, I want you to think about casting this heavy fly. And if you haven't done it, you probably know what it's like. It's pretty crazy. And Chad is doing it day in and day out, and he's just pretty humble, but he can chuck this 70 feet already. So, man, hats off to you. That's a feat. I'm always blown away by that too, at how fast that you've adapted or been able to do that, because this size of fly is pretty intimidating. There's a lot of guys that won't do that.
Well, it's fun to test them out, but there's days where I don't think it's too fun to cast those big flies. But man, we've hooked up some nice fish on them, so
Yeah.
it's worth it.
Yeah. And don't you think when you see this in a big fish's mouth, it's really not that big?
No, no, it's really not. Guys are posting pictures all over social media with fish they've caught, and they've got 8, 12-inch, fish in their mouth. So
Yeah.
a 7-inch fly really isn't that big when you think about it.
Well, learning to cast one with the proper knots is just that much better. We could talk about how we set up our leader and everything with those knots, but the knots is key. That's where it starts.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to recap, guys, the knots we'd recommend you learn if you're just getting into fly fishing, learning to tie knots, want to learn some new knots: the perfection loop, the blood knot, the surgeon's knot, the improved clinch knot, non-slip loop knot, and the figure 8 dry fly knot. So take some
Yeah.
time and learn those fantastic knots.
Take you through your dry, your nymph, and joining sections together, and streamers too. Those knots will get you started in a good way.
Absolutely. Jason, any parting tips, words of wisdom?
Go fishing. Get out there. And learn those knots. If you don't have anything to do this winter, it's a bad winter day or whatever, get some rope out like Chad suggested or something and tie some knots. Practice those.
Yeah. Yeah. You just got to practice. You just got to do it, and it'll get easier. So,
yeah. Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for listening to this week's podcast. Hope you have some great success fishing. Stay safe on all your fishing adventures and stick 'em solid.
Stick 'em solid.